And today we are very pleased to welcome a guest who started out his career as a runner in television and worked his way all the way up to being a director, and having been the only director to have started on the original Doctor Who's and worked his way through into the renaissance of Doctor Who in 2005. Graeme Harper, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's good.
You're very welcome.
So, Graeme, Ollie mentioned very quickly there that you directed Doctor Who, both old Doctor Who and new Doctor Who. And like doing our research, we discovered that you're actually the only director who has ever done that. First off, congratulations. But second, how did you find the differences between the two?
Enormous. The stories were still exciting. They've always been interesting and exciting and unusual to do. I mean, for any person and in any job that you actually did on any of the series, it was always interesting to do. The difference was that in the 80s, which is when I did my first episodes, they were all multi-camera studio, and strange enough, the BBC always did filmed excerpts, filmed location work that was cut into electronic multi-camera studio work. So it always looked odd because it jarred. Suddenly you got this kind of film flicker when you went outside, but inside was electronically all stable and whatever. And it was multi-camera. So you had 4 or 5 cameras in the studio being cut up by an assistant, a vision mixer who sat next to you in the gallery, cutting up all the shots that you'd planned as this episode or as the scenes were done. You know, as you went through each scene, all the shots that I'd planned were all written down, and he would cut, or she would cut up those shots as each line or each movement or wherever I wanted the cutting to happen would happen. By the time we got to 2006, which is when I was invited to come back to the new series, now it was like all the movies, Star Wars and all those great science fiction films, single camera. So it's like you're making a film. You're doing a single camera shoot where you shoot every shot singularly with a single camera. Well, you had 2 cameras probably covering a wider shot, maybe a mid shot and a tight shot at the same time, whatever. There were laws and rules you had to abide by, but you would do it shot by shot as opposed to a whole scene which was shot and cut up by multi-cameras. So it was that's a quick way of making programs. It's not very efficient in terms of lighting. That's the problem, because you can't light for each angle, each shot. So only 3 shots of each of the cameras would be terrific in the studio, in the multi-camera studio, whereas the other 2 might be, there might be shadows. There might be a problem with the lighting because it couldn't light every shot perfectly.
Graeme, you mentioned multi-cameras there. I remember seeing some documentary footage some years ago. I think it was in one of the Tom Baker episodes where they were filming and they caught a glimpse of one of the other cameras. And then we said, we need to shoot again. But they said, sorry, it's, I think maybe it was 6 o'clock or whatever the time was. And they had to stop. Yeah, that's right. They had some time restrictions where they literally just had to work with what they had. Maybe it was due to some unions or some sort of rules. But was that something you had to deal with quite a lot on Doctor Who?
I did. When I got invited to do the first Doctor Who's in the 80s, I was so ambitious, wanting to make it look stunning. I wanted a calling card. I wanted my episodes to be exciting, like everybody else's. And I also knew, because of the likes of Star Wars, which were out in the cinema by then, we had to, Doctor Who had to compete with that. And at the same time, it was done on like 2% of the budget. It was extraordinary, but it was multi-camera. My problem was, because I was ambitious, I wanted to shoot as much as I could single camera. So it was more like a movie, which is more exciting visually. That's what I was trying to do. And you can't do that in a 2-day studio where you're doing 2 episodes of a 4-episode story. You needed multi-camera studios to get through all the material in that time. But if you start doing single camera work, you're wasting lots and lots of time, because you're never going to get all the shots you would have got had you cut up 5 cameras, you know, as you went through a scene. So I know that we lost several scenes. They never appeared because the producer, I ran out of time, and you know, I was so ambitious. But the producer, I know, really liked what I was trying to attempt to do. I know he was excited. John Nathan Turner, this was. And he and the script editor, whilst I was shooting the episodes, they were quickly scrabbling through the script to see what they could lose in order to get us finished. Because if you went over 10 o'clock at night, the electricians pulled the plug. They were going home.
Really? Wow.
And they did.
And it was that
And
cutthroat that they would literally go 10 o'clock.
Oh, yes. There was a rule that you, as you went through the day, this is for any studio, invariably all directors had this problem. I mean, I was more ambitious and being really, well, I was inexperienced. So, you know, I thought, oh yeah, I can do it. And I couldn't. And a lot of directors had the same problem. So what happened was that by about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening, the first assistant in the studio would realize we're never going to finish. We might need another 15 minutes at the end of the day, or half an hour even. So he would go around, or he would get his assistants to go around all the crew in the studio quietly asking, as we were shooting, asking would they be prepared to go on for another 15 minutes or half an hour. That meant they got extra pay, but they didn't. If you suddenly asked people to go on at 5 to 10, they were not happy. But if you warned them so they could ring home and tell loved ones that they wouldn't be home for supper or whatever, they'd be back at 11 o'clock or one. Most of the time they said, oh, all right, yeah, here we go again. But they would agree. But if you didn't and you left it till 10 to 10, you know, you've got 10 minutes to go. Oh, look, chaps, we're in trouble. They'd say, stuff you and pull the plug.
And you mentioned there, Graeme, about being inexperienced. Do you think that gave you a different kind of ambition, though? Because you were slightly more naive than, say, a more experienced director. Do you think that led to more areas of you maybe pushing the boundaries of what you were doing?
Oh, that's a good one. I think I was just ambitious. I had been I came up through the ranks. I wasn't just offered a directorship from outside. I joined the BBC and had been working for 14 years, going through, coming up through the ranks in drama, and I knew very well how to construct a program, because I helped directors to do that and would warn them, oh, you haven't got time to do that. Maybe we've got to compromise here and there in the planning, in order for them to know that they were really going to a studio with confidence that they could get through all the material. It wasn't so complicated that we would have to have extra time. So I knew all that. But once you become a director, all that goes out the window, and your ambition of the story you want to tell is paramount. So if, first assistants would assume that I would be self-timing myself, and of course I wasn't. I was just excited about what I was doing, and the time just goes like that. When you're having fun and when you're really enjoying what you're doing, all the time in the world goes out the window. You just lose all sense of time, and I'm afraid I did. Yes, gradually as I went through my career as a director, I learned to pace myself, and I learned how to construct something and to make compromises. That's the big thing. I think it's the same today. You have to learn. All television and film is compromising. You can get great moments, but at the cost of something you may have to lose later.
And in the older, before the break in '89, I believe it was, until they brought it back in 2005, they were mainly four episode series, or 6, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And were you brought on per story, or did you do 3 episodes of one, or did you do the whole? Would you direct the entire series?
In 1984, I suspect there were probably 12 episodes throughout the whole of the series, maybe a few more, and they would be made up in that period. They were doing 45-minute episodes. So I did all my stories. That's a lie. The first story I did was called The Caves of Androzani. That was 4 half-hour episodes, and the plan was you had 3 or 4 days filming for all the exterior stuff on film, would you believe? And then in the studio you'd have 2 days, you'd rehearse for 5 days in a rehearsal room somewhere, and then I would plan my camera script, give that to somebody. They would type it all up. The production assistant, she would type the whole script up. That would be given to the whole crew, and we would have 2 days in the studio to go through 2 episodes, an episode a day. So you're doing half hour of say 20 scenes per episode each day, and you would be doing 4. I had 4 episodes. The next year, I was off another Doctor Who. That by then they'd gone to 45 minutes, and I did 2-parter. So it was 2 45-minute episodes to make the story, which was Revelation of the Daleks.
Was that with Colin Baker?
Yes. So
That's
I did. Right. My first story, Caves of Androzani, saw the end of Peter Davison, and he transferred into Colin Baker.
That's right. Wasn't he? I believe was he shot with some sort of ray gun or something? I can't remember, but I remember the regeneration period, because Colin Baker had appeared as another character, hadn't he, in previous Doctor Who's before he took over as.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Quite a name in that at that time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What was it like when a new Doctor came on? Because it was quite an event for the country, and it was always on the news. It was quite anticipated. What was it like working when you brought a new Doctor in, a new actor? What was it? Much more pressure on you to get it right?
I saw in Colin Baker. So he was in one studio of mine right at the very end. We did the transformation, and I literally had half an hour with him on the studio. Right. He replaced Peter, took up the position Peter was, sat up and said, "I'm not a moment too soon, my dear," or whatever, I think was his famous line. Change must come, I think it was, and I'm not a moment too soon. And that's all I had with him. Then the next year, I think he'd done 3 or 4 or 5 stories by the time they got to the story I was invited to do. So he was on it, he was up and running, and had found his feet as Doctor Who. So it was just a different actor to me. He had a different way of approaching his character and approaching the way he worked, and you just had to drop in and get used to that was how he was and how he played, etc. Does that make sense? He wasn't, no actor is identical to the other. They have little quirks and foibles and the way they like to work and what they how they are, and the fun they want to inject into the day. It was delightful. He was a delightful actor to work with, and still is.
The phrase events was used, or the word events was thrown about a bit during there. And I was going to say, you, as a Doctor Who director, have been involved in quite a few events, as it were, including the regeneration of Colin Baker there, and then with David Tennant towards not his regeneration into Matt Smith, but
almost.
Almost, yeah. That's what I was going to say. The big kind of crossover where we got the Rose Tyler, the end of that story where, her and the alternate David Tennant went off. How does it feel to have been invited several times to do 2-parters or event stories on such a big show like Doctor Who?
It's really weird because I always took on Doctor Who, and certainly in the 80s, they were exciting jobs to do, and I was really thrilled to be offered Doctor Who, but they were jobs. I wasn't, who knew I was going to be associated with Doctor Who in such a big way that I was. 20 years later or so, I was then invited back to do really, really exciting, amazing scripts and great stories with Cybermen and Daleks at war with each other. It was quite an extraordinary and very flattering for me. The second time I was invited, which was the new series, I had been fortunate to do quite a lot of action and adventure stuff throughout my whole career. I got that kind of work, as well as comedy and very straightforward drama. I had a lot of action and adventure. And just prior to being asked to do the new series, I was working on a series called Still River Blues, which was about the fire service up in the northeast of England. And each episode had 4 major events, as you call them, but events within the stories, fires, and exciting to me how we actually tried to shoot real fires and the putting them out and saving of lives and whatever. I had never had so much action and adventure in one series. I did 6 episodes of amazing action that I had to imagine how to do and create with the visual effects and stunt people, etc. So it was, and the whole crew. But what happened was I was then asked the next year to do Doctor Who. Was terrific. I was really excited. And I had no fear. What was stunning was I went into Doctor Who, this new series, knowing that it had to be really, really exciting and compete with the big films out there. They were, I think, round about £1 million was spent on each episode. Whereas in my day, it was probably about £12.50. I don't know. It was very low. I mean, it wasn't that much, but it was more than that. But it was a small amount compared to £1 million an episode. And that meant in that 1 hour, you could really go for it. And I was nervous of all of creating the big effects, but I was not afraid. It was stunning. And that came from being trusted with this big action adventure series of the fire service. So I was very fortunate. Somebody was looking after me there. It was very exciting.
And when Doctor Who came back, how was there talk about it for a long time behind closed doors? Did you hear rumours and whispers, or did suddenly someone come to you one day and said, "Look, we're redoing Doctor Who," and you were surprised? But how did that feel to get back involved with it after such a long time?
There were rumours. It's quite interesting what happened. There were rumours, and then this magical name, Russell T Davies, came up. And I say magical because 20 years before, maybe even longer, in about 1983, somewhere around where I was doing the first Doctor Who's, I was invited to go as a junior director to take over from somebody who had gone ill on a programme, a children's Saturday morning programme. Do you remember those, like Tiswas, where there were Saturday morning 2 or 3 hour programmes for young people? And I was invited to do one called On the Waterfront, which was this mad comedy series full of sketches and lots of very funny, silly things for 2 hours up in Liverpool for BBC. And it
was on the docks. On the docks, is that right?
On the docks, yeah.
That's right.
And one of the contributors to that was Russell T Davies, who was then about 22. And he was a writer he was an assistant producer, he was called. And his job was to rewrite a camp, sort of silly version of a very famous French action adventure series. I can't remember what it was now, but the Flaming Daggers or Arrows, Flaming Arrows, I can't remember. It was this wonderful French children's action series like Robin Hood, but he did all these and converted all the voices into these funny sort of characters and rewrote all the dialogue, which was in French originally, so it was all out of sync and everything, but it was very, very funny. And this was Russell T Davies, and so for about 6 weeks I got to know this young guy quite well, because he would be writing and creating this little series each week, and I would make sure it was slotted into the overall editing of the stories. We recorded it on a Friday, and it went out as if it was live on the Saturday morning. But of course, it had been recorded the night before or whatever. And so his little areas were slotted in. So I knew this man for 6 weeks. We then met again later when I was doing another comedy drama series that he was a script editor on, I think, for Granada Television. So I had another 6 or 8 weeks working with him, probably 10 years later. So I knew Russell, not very well, but I knew him. When I heard the rumours, he was now starting to make headway as a very seriously respected writer. I found his address. I had his address from many years before, and he still lived in the same place. And I wrote to him and I said, "Dear Russell, I don't know if you remember me, but I would give my left and right arm to have a shot at doing just one story, see if I could still do it, of Doctor Who. give us a job, bruv. You know, give me a break. Do that.
That's basically Charlie and my life all the time now.
Yeah.
That's basically what we're doing.
The amount of movies, TV shows where I find myself going, good Lord, what I would give to be a part of that.
Well, it'll happen. If you really fight for it, I promise you something, you'll make the mountains move. And he wrote back to me saying, oh, really nice to hear from you, Graeme. Look, it's not going to be down to me. That's a lie. Of course it was down to him. He said,
I'm taking
lying through his teeth.
But
Graeme said.
He said, he wrote back to me saying, it's not really going to be down to me. Your name's going to be in the pot, I guarantee you, and let's just see what happens. But it's early days for me yet. And yes, there are moves to do a new Doctor Who. So I hoped, that was very nice of him. He couldn't commit himself, and that was fine. I'd made my pitch and see what happens. And then while I was doing this series, Steel River Blues, they started to make, in 2005, the new series of Doctor Who. And I was really disappointed that I didn't have any, I wasn't approached or whatever.
I was going to say, I bet you were a bit jarred off when that started. You were just I asked for that.
It's not, I was much older by then, and they were looking for young, exciting directors. And I still thought I was fairly young and exciting, but I was getting on. I was in my 60s by then. And I was doing Steel River Blues. And one day, while I was on that show, my agent rang me and said, guess what? You're being invited to have lunch with Russell and Phil Collinson, who I didn't know at that stage, for lunch. They'd love to talk about maybe offering you something in Doctor Who. So yes, as soon as you like. And we had the meeting. I was invited to this meeting. We had a conversation. And at the end of it, they said, okay, Graeme. So we had a nice hour and a half together, eating and drinking and talking about life in general and Doctor Who. And then they said, okay, well, let's do it. We're gonna offer you a two-parter. We don't know which one yet. We'll come back to you. And I went, wow, Carl, yes, okay. And I said, so everything was relaxed then. Oh, right, okay. So then we carried on drinking and getting really happy. And I said, so what was it then that made you realise at this meeting you were going to give me the chance? What suddenly made you say that? And also tell me now, rather than make me wait for a week or two before you inform my agent. And they said, to be very, very honest, Graeme, you almost had the job the moment you walked in, because you made an episode in the 1980s, a Doctor Who story, which the whole series was slowly seemed to be being killed off, and then suddenly along comes this this story, which is the Caves of Androzani, and he said you had 3 cliffhangers, 3 episodes with cliffhangers that was so exciting. Whilst this series was dying, we were fans, Phil and I, as kids. We were children in those days, and there was me as a director. And we loved this show so much, and yet it was being killed off. And then suddenly you come along, and then there's 3 wonderfully exciting finales to episodes. And anybody who could do that with no money, no time to make the thing properly, with the little that you had, you still managed to lift this episode, this story out into something really exciting. So you were going to get a job, whatever happened. Oh, I thought it was wonderful. And then off I went, and the next year I did Doctor Who. I got my break. What was wonderful, when they offered me, it wasn't 2 episodes, it was 4. It was the 2-part in the middle of the series, which was the Cyberman story, and then this massive, epic 2 episodes, which was War with the Daleks and Cybermen. 52-day shoot. It was extraordinary.
I remember the episode very, very clearly. It was brilliant because I remember right at the end when Rose goes through the portal and that's it. She can't come back. And I remember
Spoiler
thinking,
alert, everyone.
Yeah, well, if you haven't watched it by now,
watched the episode.
I remember when that happened, and I was in shock because I must have been, early teens, maybe late, like 9, 10, that kind of area. And that happened, and I was blown away because it was crazy that Rose hadn't been killed off, but she couldn't be with the Doctor, and there was this love story going on between them, and I was just I was heartbroken, but like elated that she hadn't died, and there was just so much going on as well with the Cybermen, because they were ghosts in that episode, if I'm correct, right?
Yes, yeah.
There were ghosts at the beginning,
Yes,
and it turned out they were Cybermen. Yeah. I thought you did a brilliant job of that, and you mentioned when you were having your meeting with Russell, and as you were telling me the story, it's really pleasant to know that it's not just actors who go through that feeling of first off being really excited for a project, but also lamenting the fact that they now, right, I've had this meeting and now I have to wait 2 weeks of me sitting there going, please, can I have it? Please, please, please. And instead, when you got it, just that excitement of being involved in a project that you love being a part of. And I suppose this is less of a question and more of I'm just really glad it's not just actors who go through that, and it is other parts of the business as well.
We all have the same problem. It's funny because I trained as an actor. I gave up when I left drama school. I soon gave up because I really didn't have the ability to be a good actor. And I want to be good at what I'm going to do. So when I meet actors, what actors, I think, when young actors don't realise is that when you meet, sometimes you go for a job and your agent has sent you up for the wrong job, really, because you're not right. But when you come in to meet a director, it's not wasted. None of it's wasted. You may be considered I'm never wanting to work with that person again. But most of the time, you mark actors down. Oh, he was really good. He's not right for this. And you talk with the producer or the casting director and say, not right for this part, but a pity because they gave a fantastic reading. It's just not quite how I saw the character. And I would rather go for that person or that person. But it's not a waste of time. And later, something wonderful can happen. A lot of times it does work that way, and a lot of times it doesn't, obviously. But it's never a waste of time for an actor to go up. Usually an actor will come up and know that he was either dead right for that part, or what was he doing there, or she, what am I doing here? I'm not right for this part at all. But it's not a waste. A lot of the times, I never said this to actors, but a lot of times I wanted to say, do you know, you're wrong for this, but don't worry about it because something will come up with me because I want to work with you. But I could never say that. There's no way you can say that to somebody during an interview, really, because you may never be able to hold yourself up to doing it. You know, something may never come along. There may never be a part for them, unfortunately. But it's never a waste. And also, it's fantastic to have an opportunity to talk properly with a director and a producer, man to man or woman to woman or whatever.
Brilliant.
Just jumping back on, we were talking about the Cybermen and the Daleks there, Graeme. Do you have a favourite villain or monster from the Doctor Who era?
Well, I have to say, I always thought before I actually did Doctor Who, when I was a child, because I say a child, when I was a young guy, Doctor Who had started, and I found the Daleks ridiculous. These dustbins with rubber suckers at the front. When you work with them, and when you're actually doing it, and when you're trying eventually to make them exciting, I mean, unless I'm wrong, you can make them interesting, exciting. They can be terrifying, and I think they are terrifying. I think when you actually walk into a room and there is a static, the body of a Dalek just innate standing, you are worried about it might swing around and turn and start attacking. It's in our psyche. We're worried about them. They are terrifying. So I think they're quite a good villain. I think Davros is the one. Davros for me. I've worked with 3 Davroses, and they've all been brilliant, all personally brilliant, and he's a terrifying character. Yeah, so Davros is my number one.
Because he wasn't brought in until the 70s, was he? So we had a long time knowing the Daleks as this machine with an alien inside, but then to see half sort of humanoid and machine, it was a real kind of a real knock for the audience, I think.
Yeah.
Very menacing.
I honestly didn't expect Ollie to know that they came that Davros was introduced in the late 70s.
I tell you what, I've been inside a Dalek.
Really?
I have. I've been inside. I knew someone who had one, and he used to bring it to like different conventions and stuff. And he said, "Do you want to go inside?" And then they pushed me around in it when I was about 11 or 12, and it was great. So yeah, definitely from inside, you do get a feeling of sort of power that you want to go and invade some faraway galaxy. But yeah, no, that's right. I was a real Doctor Who nut when I was young. So yeah, it's all still in there.
Well, I was going to ask, when you mentioned coming on set and having, the Cybermen and the Daleks there, how big are the actual models, and are they made of plastic? Are they made of metal? Like, having never actually seen one in person before, what is it like to be around them?
Well, they seem to be constructed of metal and wood, I think. So, I mean, to be very honest, I didn't ever show that interest to discover how they were made, but I did look at them and touch them and feel. From my memory, they were like making a barrel. It was a wooden structure with lots of metal strips, or maybe there were plastic pieces attached to it. The panels were plastic or whatever, but they were and painted. Well, eventually, they were multicolored, but painted black. They were quite black and solid and terrifying. I would never have wanted to be a Dalek operator because it looked a lot of hard work. Well, so
yeah, that's it. And I wasn't even getting paid, and I was like, "Oh, I've had enough of it."
Charlie, yeah.
Was there a if you're happy to say, was there a Doctor that was your favourite? Maybe not even one that you worked with. Was there a particular one?
No, I like them all. I've worked with all of them, I think, apart from William
Really?
Harper. Well, no, that's not true. I didn't work with all of them at all. I worked with obviously David Tennant. I worked with Colin Baker, Peter Davison, Tom Baker, and John Pertwee. And my very first job, the first week as a call boy, a runner at the BBC, I worked on the one episode of Patrick Troughton's first episode of Doctor Who. It was the first week when I was learning how to be a call boy, a runner. So I've worked with them all. I actually enjoyed all of them for different reasons. My favourite, it's not a favourite, but I got to know John Pertwee quite well. And I got to know Tom Baker quite well. I worked on several of their episodes, their stories, as an assistant director coming up. And I really enjoyed working with them. But I liked them all. And I loved working with Peter Davison. I really had a lot of fun with him on Caves of Androzani. I then worked a little bit with Colin Baker. But most of the stuff I've done is with David Tennant. I mean, I did 11 episodes, I think, 11 stories with him.
Well, Peter Davison is now David Tennant's stepfather. No, not stepfather.
Dad-in-law.
Yeah, father-in-law, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. That's strange, isn't it? I bet they've got some nice stories to tell about what they got up to.
I bet quite a few of their conversations at the beginning were all Doctor Who.
Yes, I should think so.
Yeah.
Well, David was a huge Doctor Who fan as a kid.
Well, there are interviews of him where he said, "When I'm older, I'm going to be the Doctor." And then he obviously became Doctor Who, and he was. I would say that he was my Doctor. He was my favourite, simply because my introduction was with Christopher Eccleston, who I loved, and then I was heartbroken when he changed into David Tennant. I was like, "Who's this guy? I have no idea where." And then so through the stories that David did, and because he was so energetic and bold, and he's a brilliant actor anyway, he really sold me as my favourite Doctor personally.
What was interesting about Catherine Tate working with him was she, in one of the stories I did, she became him. It was extraordinary. That was the Dr. Donna of the whole series.
Yeah.
She became him. And, he could speak at 3,000 miles an hour. It was extraordinary. Some of his speeches were extraordinary. The speed in which his brain was able to unravel and solve a mystery or a problem, and she could do the same as the character. It was extraordinary. That's an extraordinary talent.
Well, that's probably down to her Catherine Tate show. isn't it? Am I bothered?
Oh yeah,
All that kind of stuff.
yeah.
But you did her episode with the turn left, didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. How was that because that was essentially an alternate universe, wasn't it? How was that to kind of play with something that had been established that you were changing?
I took it in my stride, I'm afraid. So I
I just did it. I'm really good at it.
No, I don't mean that obviously. Oh, I'm clever, and I mean, I probably, if you ask me, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was right. Every episode that I did with Russell T Davies as the showrunner, I said to Russell, I don't know whether he did it with other directors, of what I'm about to tell you, I'm sure he had this same conversation with them all. But every episode, as I was about to shoot, most of them were starting on Monday. And I said to him, can I meet you on the Thursday or Friday, before we start shooting? Having gone through all the changes of the script, we've done all our planning meetings, blah. I'd like a serious conversation just with you and me, and Phil Collinson, who was the producer on most of them, if they want to be there, to go through exactly how I'm going to tell this story, so that there are no surprises. I hope you're going to enjoy what I do, but there are no surprises that you would suddenly go, oh, I don't want that. Why are you doing that? And he said, of course. And Russell would stay up. I don't know when he slept. If I was doing a night shoot, which on the first block I ever did was 52 days, the first 15 days were night shoots. And he was available to me to talk to on the phone any time of the day or night of any of the shoot. And he did that. He was available for anybody. If you had a problem and you wanted to talk to him about it, you could talk to him any time of the day. And in 15 night shoots, there was going to be some time when I needed to talk to him about a problem. And I did. He was always awake, waiting for my phone call if it should come. So I never knew how he slept. And he said, I can meet you on Friday or Thursday. It was either Thursday or Friday. And he gave me 3 hours of his time. We'd go and have a meal together or a drink in a bar or whatever. And we'd always sit in an office, and he would allow me to say, turn the pages of the script and say, I'm going to do this way. That's what I'm going to do there. Don't expect that to happen because I can't afford it, but we're going to do. And we would go through the emotional content and the mechanics of the whole thing, what he is going to get and what he wasn't going to get. And Phil the same, but Phil Collinson was always by my side anyway, so he would know what I was doing, and we talked a lot about it anyway. But Russell, I got these solid 3 hours every time I was about to start. And out of that, I can't remember the question you asked me, but out of all that, I was able to understand any mysteries that I hadn't quite understood. So this new universe, I understood. I had a serious conversation with Russell about how this story should be told and unfold, etc.
And from when, compared to the older episodes you worked on, how long between finished when you wrapped to when it was broadcast? How long was the post-production? Because there was obviously a lot more visual effects they worked on.
Oh, absolutely. It was massive. So I can't remember, but it would usually be about 6 weeks after you'd finished shoot. You probably were involved for another 6 weeks, which was editing to start with. But there was obviously big gaps within the edits of scenes that had lots of special effects in, which were being created by the Mill, who were the CGI company who did all the effects in those days. And they'd be working with their minions on all the big special effects. Like in the first story I did, we had there was going to be a Zeppelin going across London, which was a mat of a CGI Zeppelin on top of an existing helicopter shot of the whole of London, the River Thames or whatever, and the House of Parliament, in which we were going to then see this balloon traveling through underneath, while we're looking down, you see this balloon trundling through the shot, etc. That would take weeks to create. So we wouldn't have that. We'd just have the shot of the River Thames. And you would know that eventually there will be a shot of a Zeppelin added to that. So that would take 6 or 7 weeks to complete. And then in your last week of post-production, 6 weeks later, 7 weeks later, there was the shot, and it would be then slotted in. So you'd oversee the whole thing right to the very end. And your job is not over until the executive producer, Russell T. Davis, and Phil Collinson, and the head of drama, Judy Gardner, they would come to a viewing and sign your episode off or make changes or whatever they felt they had to do. We had several of those. It would take 2 viewings with them. One viewing, which was really to do the first 950 notes that they had. And then a week later, when you kind of covered all those notes, they would see it again, and then you get the next 900 notes. I'm being unfair. You probably get about 80 or 90 notes about taking a trim of a shot off there. Could we change that dialogue? We need to add this, or can we lose? And it was a really big collaborative job. You know, together we eventually created the show that we all wanted.
When you finally see on the TV what you've worked on, are you able to separate yourself from it, or do you watch it and think, oh, I remember that day that was filmed at 9:30, or I remember there was a problem here, or we had to add this? Is that, do you watch it as a director? I
do. And when I'm watching other people's work, I don't. I watch it like a viewer, and I don't think, oh, I bet that was hard to do. I'm just engrossed if I'm going to be. Of mine, I have all the regrets come out. Oh gosh, I wish. And I do remember that bloody awful day that happened, and he was horrible, and whatever it was, whatever happened on that day. I have to say that with Doctor Who, I don't remember many days that were awful. It would usually be weather that would be the misery, that you couldn't do what you wanted to do because it was pouring down with rain and it'd just been sunny, you know, an hour before. There's frustration, but usually I sort of regret, I wish I could do that scene again because I'd have done it slightly differently in retrospect. It's a bit late then.
Percentage-wise of location and studio, would it be budget restraints or obviously story constraints as well? But would it be sort of 30% on location or sometimes 100% on location?
They would want to have more in the studio than on location, but that changed. I mean, depending on what the story was, that could change that percentage of what's in the studio and what's in the TARDIS, for example, and sets in the studio. Probably, I suppose, in general, it's about 30% on location and 70 in the studio. I think that's probably about how it would average out, because going on location is expensive.
Yeah, 100%.
It depends on your sets and how much they cost, but in general, we thought the location work is expensive.
Sure. And going back to when you worked on the Peter Davison ones around that era, whereabouts was that filmed? That obviously wasn't in Wales then, was it?
No. We were Peter Davis. So we were based in a house called Threshold House on Shepherd's Bush Green. That is all.
Oh, in Shepherd's Bush. Okay, right. I didn't realise it was actually there.
Yeah, we weren't in the donut, as I call it.
The donut, no.
Television centre. It was we were on Shepherd's Bush Green. That was Drama Serials. They were in a different building, a small modern. Well, it was a fairly modern building on Shepherd's Bush Green, which has been pulled down now. That's going to become something else. And so the studio work was done at Television Centre, which was just half a mile down the road. And the location work for that was Dorset, in a China, no, not a China club, but a sandpit near Wareham in Dorset.
Changing the subject just slightly, if you were to come into directing now, what would you do differently? Or obviously the whole industry is different, but how would you approach it to how you approached it back then for anyone listening who is ambitious and wants to become a director or a producer?
So it's really interesting because a lot of directors up and coming now have said this and will say, oh, he's old-fashioned, you know, I'm not going to do it that way. But I'm going to give you a bit of advice if you want to be a director by my old-fashionedness. So in my day, there was a director's course. It was 3 months long. So in the 1980, I think I did my course, 81, and I got my first job in 82, I think. So that director's course was, 6 weeks video and 6 weeks film, because although the cameras captured the same shots and the same kind of shots, they're both different. One's film and one's electronic, going on to video. So it was split into two. And strangely enough, instead of me doing a 3 months course all in one big hit, they couldn't fit it in that way. So I did 6 months film first, and 6 weeks film course, and then 6 weeks in the next year on video. So there was a kind of gap of a year between the two. So I was never going to become a director, at least for a year, whatever happened, because I had to finish that course before I was going to be offered any work. The reason I'm saying all that is, unfortunately, it was done the wrong way for me. What you should do is have the video, in that period, have the video course first, because that you learn how to create all your shots very quickly. And then film becomes much easier to understand, but it was done in a different way. When I started the video side, I learnt in that course how to create each shot by using, having a camera plan of the studio with all the sets marked out, because we had different little scenes to do, which we then had to create how we would shoot them. And you were taught how to, and of course I knew how to do it because I was the first. I did all the camera plans, that the director working out where all these shots were going to come from that he'd planned. So I knew how to do that. But so you learn how to work out every angle of the camera shots you require to get close-ups, wide angles, whatever. And you use a protractor with a big camera plan, 1/50th of the set size, and your protractor was 1/50th of whatever. So you could see what you would see of the set, etc. So you could work out in detail exactly how to get each shot and what it would look like and where it would come from. And so you could write your camera script up with the degree, and you had to write the degree of the lens size of the shot you're trying to get, not just a close up, a mid shot, and wide angle. You would have to do a 50 mil, go on to a 30, go to a 16, go to 9. And you would have to write down all the sizes. Well, that gave me a fantastic inside knowledge of what the camera would do and where it would have to be in order to get the size of shots you want, etc., both on location and in the studio. Because I had to write a camera script for the studio, write all the detail, I never stopped doing that all my life. Well, of course, gradually, a lot of the work I did, multi-camera studios really became for soap operas, because a lot of soap operas still now do multi-camera studio work to get because the speed you can do it in is so fast and economic. They don't do it on film. Or they don't do it single camera now. So I was trained into working out what every shot would be and where it would become, where I could tell you where to place the camera exactly to get the size of shot that I wanted. And I had that training. You don't get that training anymore. That's something I don't think you do, because there isn't that multi-camera studio element to most drama. There is to some, but not in general. So I always plan, even to this day, I plan like a camera script every scene I'm going to shoot. I write a line and describe the shot, not the lens necessarily, because I know that I don't have to tell anybody. I don't have to say to a cameraman that lens size I want him to be on, but I can do. If I say that's too wide, I want to be on a tighter lens, I can say the degree of lens I'd like him to be on. I wouldn't be that offensive to a cameraman because you collaborate and do it. But I know exactly where I want to do every shot, and I write it down. So in my back pocket, for the day, I will have the piece of script that I'm going to do for that day with all my shots on. Now, most directors now don't do that. They would probably do a little tram line down saying close up here to cover all that from there to there. And then we'll do a wide shot from there to there. I need another wide shot really wide to give me the whole scene on the 2 shots, and they would just write little notes to themselves. But I write everything down. I could give that to an editor and say, I really would like it to be cut like that. They would tell me, get stuffed, I should think, because they want to have some inspiration and freedom to offer you possibly another way to cut it together. But I could do that. I do it because I've got it as a spare. It's a safety net. I know what I'm talking about when I go onto set. And if I can't do what I want, or there's something offered by an artist or a cameraman that's a better way of doing something, I'm going to go stuff what I've written down. We're doing that. That's a lovely idea. I want to do that. And you collaborate and do it. But you must plan. The point I'm making is you don't have to do what I do, but you must plan. You cannot afford to go in and go, oh, what should we do with this scene today, boys? Or boys and girls. You must know what you're going to do. And then if you see something better, you can toss that out the window and do it. But you must plan. Economically, you must plan. And also, it's exciting. You go in with a plan and you see something better. You really appreciate it. But you never veer away too much from your dream. Just, you may compromise, that's all. But you are enabled, you're able to do that. You're able to change your plans very quickly. If you don't plan, you're not getting the best out of your day, I don't think.
So to kind of condense that, you'd say preparation, 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 and then be open to collaboration.
Absolutely. And I hope you edit all that, what I've just said, and say just that. That's brilliant. That's exactly the point. I wish I'd said that.
No, but really, really insightful. And it's actually a really nice in-depth way of explaining how, you know, if you cut corners, and you were talking about how modern directors might just write tram lines of, I'd quite like this kind of shot. Whereas you have written a script of, I want to evoke this from this camera angle. So here is all my homework. We are now going to do this together. Someone gives you an idea. Oh, okay, collaboration. We're going to work on this together. And now we've got this at the end of it.
Do you know, it's interesting you say it like that, because there were times in my early days when on film, not in the studio, when we do multi-camera studio, you were doing what I was asking for, and it would change, and we would all agree to change it. But on film, if I came in with a plan and then suddenly the cameraman said, the actual operator said, while we're drifting in or tracking in to do that, I could just drop the camera down to pick up that little detail there, pan up to see the hand picking that up, and then come back to the original shot. Would you like that? And I go, whoa, yeah. The DOP, who's in charge of the picture, you know, how we get it, he's not in charge of me, but he's in charge of how we would get what I'm dreaming of, would say from that collaboration, oh, I hate directing by committee. Not directing by committee, it's collaboration. Someone has a better idea and they're brave enough to say to the director, I could offer you that, and you love it. If he didn't, it would have been, what a waste. Why would you not want to take an expert's idea of how he could get you something you didn't have to worry about getting another shot of? I can get it for you at the same time, pan out, and it'll be interesting the way we do it. Yes, please. That's not collaboration by directed by committee. That's pure collaboration. And that's the way most good directors get the best work they get.
Through some of our research, we heard that you have worked with Stanley Kubrick at
No. This is my question, Charlie. This is my question. How dare you?
Ollie's going to
I was waiting. Yeah, I read on Wikipedia that, I mean, how true this is, but you did meet Stanley Kubrick once at Boreham Wood. I'm a bit of a, when I say a bit of, I'm a bit of a Stanley Kubrick nut. So if you could just tell me about that would be great.
Well, it's not that exciting, but there's a big point.
For me, this definitely is. It definitely is.
Well, it's a little moment in my life, but odd what happened, and odd how the whole of our lives is a big wheel, big circle. You start one end, it comes back and bites you in the bum, or nicely bites you in the bum at the other end. So When I was 18 or 19, I learnt to drive. I became, I was an actor. I took my driving lessons. Yeah, I lived in Bournemouth, which was where Elstree Studios were. So that was the Hollywood. It wasn't Pinewood and Shepperton. They're just one-off studio. Now they're big. But in those days, Bournemouth had 5 or 6 major film studios there, and it was Hollywood. So I lived up First Road in Bournemouth, about a mile away from the studios. The school of driving that I took my lessons took to me and said, and they realised I was an actor, and they were always very interested, you know, as we are now talking about, you know, have you met this person? What tell us about the fame? You know, in my sort of downside time having our breaks, we were always talking about who you've met or whatever. And eventually, do you know, I'm talking absolute nonsense. I haven't become a driving director yet, driving instructor. They offered me the chance to become a driving instructor. They were happy that I would take time off to be an actor when and if those jobs came along. And driving instructing in those days paid very well. I don't know what it pays now, but it was quite lucrative. So I did quite well, and I took this job. And the reason they wanted me to be a driving instructor for them was because I just learned to drive, so it would all be fresh about, you know, how to teach other people. But they also knew that I would be good. I don't know why they thought this, but it would be good that people in the film studios would get an actor to teach them to drive.
You could pretend you knew what you were doing.
But that was the premise. So, and sure enough, I did get a lot of people from the studios, young people wanting to learn to drive, and I taught them. But one day, I got this woman offered to me for driving lessons called Iris Rose. And Iris Rose was from MGM Studios, who English. So she got in the car, and I was dying to talk to. Most of the people I wanted to let them know I was in the business and blah. This was just my daytime job, you know. It was what I wanted to do was get into the business, and I half knew that I wanted to get into production. I never knew quite how to. I didn't know anybody really very much. I had one good contact at the BBC, but I was 18 years old. So from 18 to 19, I was teaching people to drive. Along comes Iris Rose, and she soon got to know from me that I really would love to be in the business. And I taught her to drive for 10 weeks. She passed a test. And on the day that she passed a test, when we got back to MGM Studios, which is where I picked her up and dropped her off, or she drove there and then she got out and I took over, she said, I'm ever so thrilled, Graeme, I can't tell you, blah, blah, blah. I've passed my test, it's wonderful. And she would pay me for each lesson, but she'd left a handbag in the studio. She said, would you like to come into the studio to collect the money and see the sets of the show I'm working on? I said, what? So we got out of the car, we walked in we walked through a stage to get to some stairs that went, or through another door to get to the stairs to go up to the offices. So we walked in, and I walked in to this massive studio stage in which there were it's the pod that, so I was walking to, I didn't know anything about it, 2001, A Space Odyssey. And I walked in, and there were 4 or 5 space sets, parts of the set, the big circular set that the main characters
that they go out in.
The space station.
The space station.
Yeah.
And the pod that Dave goes chasing off for the body that his mate has turning spurred. I can't speak today, sorry.
It's okay.
His mate was turning in space once he was Hal had done his naughty and whatever. But I didn't know any of that. I didn't know anything about 2001: A Space Odyssey. I didn't know Arthur C. Clarke. I'd never heard of him, but I had heard of Stanley Kubrick. Anyway, I was looking at all this. She didn't tell me she was working for Stanley Kubrick. She just was in the studios, someone who worked there. And I was looking at, I said, what is this? This is science fiction. This looks good. And she said, no, I'm working with Stanley Kubrick. We're making a version of the story by Arthur C. Clarke, 2001, A Space Odyssey. And I didn't know anything about it at all, but that was all interesting. So we go up the stairs and walk into this long, narrow office. And there's a guy there with a big beard working at a big plan, a studio plan. He's doing so. And she's leading me, I'm following behind her, and she says, Stanley, I'd like to introduce you to Graeme. He's my driving instructor. And he turns around and says, oh, hi, Graeme. Nice to meet you, and shake my hands. And she said, Graeme, this is Stanley Kubrick. And I went, oh Mr. Kubrick. And I was speechless. I couldn't believe I was talking to this great man, because I loved the films that he'd made up to that point, which we could have another story about. That's another interview. And I had this literally 3 minutes, and I said, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, we're making this and blah. And he had 3 minutes conversation with me. He didn't talk to me. He wanted to get on with what he was doing. But we had this meeting, and he gave me this little chat, and he gave me his time of day for 3 minutes. I went into the office after that to collect my money for the lesson, etc. And I said to Iris, I can't tell you what an honour. Wow, I've just met Stanley Kubrick. And she says, yes, he's nice. He's he's nice, very interesting what we're doing. I left, I couldn't believe I got home and told my wife, yes, I was married when I was very young. I said, I've met Stanley Kubrick. I've met this fantastically famous director, blah, blah, blah. Hundreds of years later, I'm now doing the new Doctor Who. I'm working with the most fabulous, one of the great operators I've ever worked with in my life, who worked most of the time on James Bond and Zorro. And I got him as the operator working with me on Doctor Who. So I had a wonderful opportunity to do fantastic work with this guy. He was a terrific operator. And one day he came in to the studio and he said to me, oh, I've got a message for you. And he pulled out of his bag or his back pocket this little envelope, and inside it, so I opened it up, and inside was this little driving instruction card from Iris Rose, with Iris Rose's name. And when you opened it up, it was my weekly comments on how well she was doing, and then passed where it said test. But it was my weekly comments, must improve on 3-point turns. Reversing's not so good here. We get by Iris Rose. And a little note from Iris Rose saying, dear Graeme, how is it that a lowly little driving instructor from 1964, I think it was, or 65, becomes a senior director on Doctor Who? How's that happen? Love Iris. And it was Iris Rose, who was the woman I taught to drive. By then, she was a senior producer on James Bond films.
Really? That's amazing. Had you told Stanley Kubrick that you wanted to be in the business, or that you were an actor? No.
But she brought me back to a point, and that was when I came away from that meeting with him. It wasn't a meeting; it was a chance
Sure.
shake of hands, and he spared me 3 minutes to say how lovely to meet you. Push off or whatever. But it consolidated to me. I thought, what am I doing over the next 2 or 3 months? What am I doing with my life? I'm being a driving instructor. My heart's in the business. I don't want to be an actor. I do want to be a director. And I want to do what Stanley Kubrick does. How do I get to do that? Because I've been to drama school. Does that mean I can also go into production? I was in a real quandary. But meeting him and meeting Iris, and also Iris got me a job. After that, she knew I wanted to get into the business. And I meeting Stanley Kubrick made me realise I was at home. When I walked into the studio, I was at home. That's where I wanted to be. When I walked into his studio and saw his sets, I wanted to be somebody dealing with that and creating stories and shooting those kind of sets and things. She got me a job on a film as a runner. But the day it started, they asked me to leave because they couldn't quite raise all their money in the end. So the film never happened. So I'd left driving instructing. I took on this job, and the next day I was out of work again. But I'd written to the BBC by then and written to somebody who had not answered me, but eventually had passed my letter on to the right people. And I got an invite that same week to go to the BBC to get a runner's job, apply for a runner's job at the BBC. And I got it. And that's when my career started in production.
It's amazing just how a few minutes can change your thought about something and sort of send you on a different trajectory.
Oh, it was eureka. It's funny. Hi, everybody. I'm going to do a little advert for the boys. But I watched your podcast with Abby Collins.
Mm-hmm.
And Abby talked to you about her eureka moment, which was a photographer she worked with, realised what she should be doing. And she didn't know what to do with her life, and suddenly he just put it all together and said, you should be doing stunt work because of all the things that she loved doing. And that was her eureka moment. Meeting Stanley Kubrick for me was my eureka moment. I suddenly realized that's what I had to strive for. I didn't think I was ever going to become a director, but I wanted to try to get into production.
But you've got to remember that if you hadn't done the driving instructing before, you never would have got to that eureka moment.
Yes.
So it's all that. So you're going back to Doctor Who quickly. Turn left and change history.
Yes. Weird. Extraordinary.
This is where we should have a sponsor now.
Yeah.
Like Red Driving School, become a driving instructor. Sponsors today's podcast.
Excellent. Well, we are coming towards the end of the podcast, Graeme, and we have a question that we like to ask all of our guests, and it is there a film out there that you are ashamed you haven't watched? you know, and when you tell someone, oh, I haven't seen that film, and they go, what do you mean you haven't seen insert film here? Is there a film that comes to mind for you where you're like, oh, I haven't watched 2001: A Space Odyssey, despite meeting Stanley Kubrick there?
I tell you a film I'm dying to see that I haven't seen, but it's Barbarella. I've heard so much about Barbarella. It's of my period. It was around when I was a young guy, and it's the kind of movie I would have definitely gone to see. And I don't know why I've never seen it.
It's on my Amazon list. It's creeping towards the top, but I need to see that as well. Is it Jane Fonda?
Yes.
Yeah,
Jane Fonda. And I'm trying to think of the directors now. Who she married, I think.
Directed by Roger Vadim.
Thank you. Roger Vadim. I think he married, but he certainly had an affair with Jane Fonda, and he certainly had an affair with Brigitte Bardot. To name but two.
My God. Well, Graeme, this has been a fantastic podcast. I really enjoyed just the anecdote alone. Have been brilliant, and to be able to talk to somebody who worked on some of my favourite Doctor Who episodes. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Graeme, so much. It's been a blast.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I've enjoyed it very much.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, and thank you to all our listeners for staying in touch. Have a good day.